The August sun hammered down on the sprawling Navy SEAL training compound, baking the asphalt and casting harsh shadows across the chain-link fences. The air trembled with heat, mixing the scent of sweat, oil, and ocean salt drifting from the nearby bay. It was a world built for discipline, no outsiders, no intrusions, no unexpected faces. And yet, that morning, the unexpected arrived. She came on foot. There was no vehicle, no escort, no clearance at the gate. One moment the guards leaned lazily against their post, fanning themselves in the oppressive heat, and the next they saw her silhouette approaching from the dusty road. She was dressed plainly denim jeans, a loose gray shirt, sneakers worn from use. Her hair, dark and pulled back, revealed a calm, expressionless face. No identification badge hung around her neck. No duffel bag in her hand. No visible purpose for being there. And yet, she kept walking. "Hey!" One of the guards barked, straightening to attention. His partner echoed him. "Mom, this is restricted, you can't," but his voice trailed off. Something in the way she walked stole the authority from his throat. It wasn't arrogance. It wasn't even defiance. It was confidence, steady and unshakable, the kind that didn't shout, but quietly announced itself in every step. She didn't glance at them, didn't break her pace. Her eyes, calm and unwavering, were focused on the interior of the base. The guards froze. For a reason neither of them could name, neither moved to block her path. Inside, the training yard was alive with noise. A platoon of SEAL candidates pushed through punishing drills, burpees in the gravel, rifle maneuvers, sprints under the brutal sun. Instructors barked orders like thunderclaps, and recruits strained under the pressure, their bodies slick with sweat. It was into this chaos that the woman walked. At first, she drew only a few distracted glances. Civilians occasionally visited bases, contractors, medics, family members escorted with clearance. But as she continued across the yard, heads began to turn. Her steps were deliberate, neither hurried nor hesitant. She didn't gawk at the drills like most outsiders did. She didn't shrink beneath the intimidating atmosphere. Instead, she moved as though she'd seen it all before, perhaps more. "Who's that?" a recruit whispered, unable to keep his eyes off her. "Civilian," another muttered, "probably lost." But his words lacked conviction. There was nothing lost about the way she walked. Lieutenant Harris, overseeing a set of push-ups, noticed the distraction rippling through his men. He turned sharply, ready to reprimand, when his gaze fell on her. His jaw tightened. Something about her presence unsettled him instantly. She had no pass, no escort, no insignia. It didn't look like she was trespassing. She looked like she belonged, though by every rule, she shouldn't. He started toward her, boots crunching on gravel. But before he could intercept, she shifted her course slightly, gliding past without even acknowledging him. Her stride brushed him aside without a word, not rudely, simply as though she didn't need permission. For a moment, Harris felt the strange sensation of being dismissed, not as a man, but as a rank. His chest tightened with offense, but something in her calm expression robbed him of the will to confront. By now, the yard was buzzing. Soldiers who never broke focus in training were pausing mid-exercise, instructors hesitating mid-command. Conversations sparked in hushed tones. Why isn't anyone stopping her? She's walking straight toward HQ. Should we do something? A group of newer recruits started forward, but a senior petty officer shook his head. His brow furrowed, not in confusion, but in recognition. He didn't know her, but he knew her type. The kind who carried themselves like ghosts of wars fought in silence. The kind who didn't need a uniform to wear authority. The woman kept walking. Every detail about her carried quiet weight. Her sneakers, though worn, were sturdy. The soles moving in rhythm without hesitation. Her hands relaxed at her sides, or faint marks faded scars, small but unmistakable. Her wrist carried a line so thin most would miss it, but to a trained eye it was the unmistakable cut of a blade wound. Long healed. She passed a group of men lifting logs in unison. Their effort faltered as she neared, the log dipping dangerously. An instructor snapped at them, furious, until he noticed what had broken their concentration. His anger melted into silence as she passed. The strangest thing was her eyes. They were not searching, not curious, not even observant of her surroundings. They were fixed, unwavering, as though she knew exactly where she was going and exactly why she was there. At the far end of the yard, inside a shaded office overlooking the drills, the base commander sat reviewing reports. Commander Jonathan. Reeves was a man of hardened steel, a veteran of countless deployments, and one who never tolerated disorder. He had seen his men distracted through exhaustion, through failure, through injury, but never through the simple presence of a stranger. So when the murmurs reached his window, when he looked up and saw his entire yard subtly pulled toward a lone civilian woman, he rose from his chair. He stepped outside, his presence instantly commanding silence. And then he saw her. The woman slowed as she neared the steps of HQ. The commander's boots echoed on the pavement as he descended to meet her, his towering figure radiating authority. Every soldier on the grounds held their breath. "Stop her," whispered one of the guards. But no one moved. Commander Reeves approached until only a few feet separated them. His eyes locked onto hers. Time seemed to freeze. The men expected the storm questions, orders, maybe even an arrest. But what they saw instead left them stunned. The commander stopped, drew himself upright, and with sharp precision raised his hand to his forehead. He saluted her. The yard erupted in whispers. Did he just? No way. That's the commander. Never had they seen him salute first, especially not a civilian. His salute was crisp, unwavering, filled with the weight of genuine respect. The woman did not return it. She didn't need to. She simply stood, still and calm, her eyes meeting his with quiet acknowledgement. When he lowered his hand, his face remained stern, but there was something else, something softer, almost reverent. The men looked on in disbelief. Whatever her name, whatever her past, one thing was clear. She carried a respect deeper than rank. And then, as quickly as she had arrived, she turned. Without a word, she walked away, retracing her steps across the yard. Nobody moved to stop her. Nobody dared to question. She left behind only silence and unshakable silence, heavier than any drill. The men stood frozen, their commander watching until she disappeared beyond the gates. They had no answers. Only questions. And questions, they realized, that might never be answered. The training yard, usually alive with a rhythm as precise as clockwork, had lost its tempo. Burpees slowed, rifle drills faltered, and the sound of boots pounding gravel softened into scattered thuds. Dozens of eyes followed the woman as she crossed the grounds, her pace steady, her expression calm. At first, the men thought it was curiosity. A stranger had wandered where no stranger belonged. Anyone would look. But within seconds, curiosity shifted into something else. It wasn't just her presence that held them. It was the way she carried herself, unshaken under the weight of so many stares. Recruits, still raw from their first weeks, whispered nervously, "Why isn't she being stopped?" One muttered, wiping sweat from his brow, "Because she's not supposed to be here." Another replied, his voice low, "Someone's about to drag her out." But no one did. Even the instructor's hardened men who prided themselves on unyielding control hesitated. Normally, a break in discipline drew immediate punishment. Yet not a single barked order cut through the air. They too were watching. From the pull-up bars, Petty Officer Daniels squinted at her. Years in the Navy had sharpened his instincts, and those instincts now screamed at him. She wasn't lost, and she wasn't clueless. Civilians who stumbled onto bases walked with hesitation, pausing at signs, darting nervous glances at guards. She did none of that. She walked like she knew every inch of this ground. Daniels nudged the man beside him. "You see that?" "Yeah," came the reply, uncertain. "That's not the walk of someone trespassing," Daniels said. "That's the walk of someone who's been here before." The words hung heavy. Lieutenant Harris, still standing near the gravel pit, clenched his jaw. He'd been dismissed once in his career before, by a superior officer who outranked him by decades. But the dismissal he felt from her silent passage had cut deeper. It wasn't disrespect. It wasn't even personal. It was as if his rank, his presence, his authority, none of it mattered in her world. He wanted to stop her, to demand answers, to reclaim order. But something froze him. Her eyes, calm and unwavering, hadn't looked through him. They had looked past him as though he was irrelevant to the path she walked. And that unsettled him more than defiance ever could. The younger recruits, still learning the meaning of discipline, felt unease ripple through their ranks. They had been trained to recognize chain of command, to salute without question, to obey without hesitation. Yet here was a woman who had no visible rank, no insignia, no name badge, yet commanded their silence without lifting a finger. Some felt irritation. "Who does she think she is?" One recruit whispered, "Walking around like this is her place." Another shook his head. "No, it's not that. Look at the commander. He hasn't said a word." The implication chilled them both. From the far end of the yard, Chief Warrant Officer Blake studied her intently. Blake was a man of few words, a quiet observer who spoke only when necessary. He had seen war-stripped men of their humanity, had seen arrogance crumble in the face of real combat. And he knew something the recruits didn't. Authority came in many forms. What he saw in the woman wasn't arrogance, it was weight. The weight of someone who had carried more than uniforms could display, more than medals could capture. It was the weight of lived experience, carved deep into her bones. Blake said nothing, but he did not look away. As she moved, whispers grew. "Maybe she's intel. Black Ops? CIA?" "No, CIA doesn't just walk onto a SEAL compound like this." "What if she's a high-ranking officer in plain clothes? Then why no salute, no ID? Nothing?" The theories spread like wildfire, but none settled the storm in their minds. Everything about her broke the order they had been taught to uphold. And yet nobody dared stop her. One man did try. Petty Officer Klein, new but eager to prove himself, stepped forward as she neared the armory. He squared his shoulders, planting himself directly in her path. His voice, firm but nervous, rang out. "Ma'am, this is a restricted zone. You'll need to stop right there." The yard quieted further. Finally, someone had challenged her. The woman slowed, just slightly, her eyes lifting to meet his. For a moment, silence. Klein felt his pulse quicken. Her gaze wasn't threatening, but it wasn't dismissive either. It was measuring, as though she was assessing him, not as a barrier, but as a man. Seconds stretched. And then, without a word, she shifted slightly to the side, gliding past him as though he wasn't worth resisting. Klein's throat tightened. He could have forced it. He could have stepped again to block her. But something in that look steady, unshaken rooted him to the ground. His feet betrayed him. She passed, and he let her. The humiliation burned in him, but no laughter followed. No one mocked him for failing to stop her. If anything, they understood, because each of them, in their hearts, knew they would have done the same. It wasn't fear she commanded, it was something heavier. Respect, unearned yet undeniable. By the time she reached the HQ steps, nearly every man in the yard, had stopped pretending to train. The silence was so unnatural, it unsettled them all. Normally, the clang of weights, the shouts of instructors, the pounding of boots created a symphony of discipline. But now the only sound was the quiet rhythm of her footsteps. Even the gulls circling overhead seemed muted. It was as if the base itself held its breath. Among the men, unease gave way to something else. Wonder. What story lay behind those calm eyes? What battles carved those faint scars? Why did the commander himself, a man who saluted no one lightly, step forward with softened eyes when she approached? The soldiers didn't know her name. They didn't know her rank if she even had one. But they knew this. She wasn't ordinary. And whatever truth lingered in her silence, it had the power to bend the strictest order in one of the most disciplined places on earth. Later, recruits would swear the air felt different that day. Heavier, charged, as if invisible electricity surged through the compound. They would say that when she walked by, their lungs tightened, their thoughts sharpened, and every instinct screamed they were in the presence of something greater than themselves. And though they didn't understand it, they didn't dare deny it. For the first time, these hardened men realized that discipline, respect, and authority weren't always written on uniforms or carried in ranks. Sometimes they were carved into people themselves, silent, unseen, yet undeniable. And so the watchful eyes followed her, unable to look away. Some stared with suspicion, some stared with admiration, some stared with fear, but all stared. For deep down, every one of them knew this woman carried something none of them could name. And they would never forget the day she walked across their base, nameless, rankless, yet commanding the silent respect of every eye that followed. Silence is not the absence of sound. On a military base, silence is a force. It presses down, unexpected and unnatural, until every breath feels like it might shatter the stillness. That was the silence she carried. The woman crossed the yard. With no words, no gestures, no acknowledgement of the men whose lives revolved around structure and order. Every soldier there had been trained to size people up in seconds friend, foe, superior, subordinate. But she didn't fit. She was something else entirely, and her refusal to explain herself only deepened the unease. Confidence radiated from her, but it wasn't the kind that came from ego or arrogance. It was quiet, subtle, ingrained. The confidence of someone who had already been tested, already been broken down and rebuilt, already walked through fire. She didn't need to prove anything to anyone. As she passed the obstacle course, a group of men paused mid-climb. Their palms gripped the wooden beams, their boots dug into grooves worn from years of use, but their focus slipped. One recruit whispered hoarsely, "She doesn't even look scared." Scared of what? Another muttered, though his voice carried the edge of unease. Scared of us. Scared of being here. Anyone else would at least look nervous. But she didn't. Her eyes remained steady, unfaltering, as if the weight of their stares was meaningless. That lack of reaction unnerved them most of all. The instructors, too, felt the shift. Men who had barked orders across battlefields, who had broken recruits into dust and built them back into warriors, now found themselves speechless. They wanted to demand she state her business, but none of them moved, because deep down they recognized something in her. Her shoulders carried no insignia, yet they bore the posture of someone who had worn heavy loads before. Her gait wasn't drilled like a recruit's, but it was practiced, efficient. She carried herself not like a soldier in training, but like a veteran of something far older, far quieter, far deadlier. Petty Officer Daniels, still watching from the pull-up bars, narrowed his eyes. He had once seen a man walk into a firefight without flinching, not because he was fearless, but because he had already accepted death. That same calm lived in this woman's stride. "She's seen combat," Daniels whispered under his breath. The recruit beside him frowned. How do you know? Daniels didn't answer. Because the truth wasn't something you explained, it was something you recognized. Combat carved itself into a person's movements. It lived in the stillness between breaths, in the way eyes scanned without scanning, in the weight of silence. That followed them, and she carried that weight effortlessly. The scar on her wrist caught more than one set of eyes. It wasn't large, but it was sharp, precise. Too clean to be an accident, too deep to be shallow. Some whispered it looked like a knife wound. Others swore it was surgical. No one dared ask. Her scars weren't questions to be answered. They were statements carved permanently, and she wore them with the same quiet confidence as her stride. One young recruit, barely 19, felt his stomach knot as she passed. He joined the SEAL program with dreams of medals and glory, but in her silence, he sensed something he hadn't yet understood: the cost. Her eyes didn't hold pride nor victory. They held memory. She didn't walk like someone who wanted to impress. She walked like someone who carried ghosts. The recruit looked down at his trembling hands and realized, for the first time, that he didn't yet understand what it meant to serve. Not fully. And somehow, that realization cut deeper than any instructor's words. As she moved further across the yard, the murmurs grew. She's not afraid of anyone here. She doesn't even look at us. It's like we don't matter. But that wasn't it. She wasn't dismissing them. She wasn't ignoring them. She was simply beyond them. Like a mountain doesn't notice the wind that brushes against its face. Like the ocean doesn't acknowledge the stones on its shore. Her silence wasn't meant to insult. It was simply her truth. She had seen more, endured more, and survived more than their questions could ever capture. Lieutenant Harris clenched his fists, still smarting from her earlier dismissal. He tried to rationalize it. Maybe she was some high-ranking officer in plain clothes. Maybe she was undercover. Maybe the commander himself had sent for her. But deep down, he knew none of that explained it. Her silence wasn't protocol. It wasn't deception. It was power. The kind that didn't need to be spoken, because it was already known. And Harris, though he hated to admit it, felt his authority tremble beneath it. By the armory, Petty Officer Klein, still reeling from his failed attempt to stop her, stared at the ground. Shame burned in his chest. He had wanted to prove himself, to show he had backbone. Instead, she had undone him with a single look. But the more he thought on it, the less it felt like failure. It wasn't that he hadn't been strong enough. It was that she hadn't needed to fight him at all. Her silence had been stronger than his command. And that realization shook him more than any reprimand ever could. The woman herself never wavered. Her silence wasn't heavy to her. It was natural. She didn't seem aware of the storm she created, or perhaps she simply didn't care. Her focus remained fixed ahead, her movements fluid and precise. Every detail about her seemed deliberate. The way her arms swung gently but evenly, the way her shoulders remained relaxed despite the attention, the way her eyes never darted nervously but held steady like a compass pointing north. It was as though she had walked this path 1,000 times before. And in a way, perhaps she had. Not this yard, not these grounds, but the path of walking into hostile territory with eyes upon her, of carrying herself with calm in the face of danger, of never letting uncertainty bend her spine. It was the walk of someone who had been tested again and again, and had learned that fear only lived in hesitation. And she hesitated for no one. The SEALs, men who prided themselves on being unshakable, now found themselves unsettled by what they didn't understand. Because silence wasn't supposed to be this loud. Confidence wasn't supposed to be this quiet. And respect wasn't supposed to be commanded without a word. Yet she had done all three. By the time she reached the steps of HQ, Her silence had spoken louder than any speech. The men didn't just see a woman without rank or name. They saw something greater, something they couldn't define but couldn't deny. Her silent confidence had turned their world upside down. And none of them, not the youngest recruit, not the sternest officer, would ever forget the lesson she carried, without uttering a single word. Because sometimes the strongest voice is the one that never needs to speak. The base had rules. Every man who trained within its fences knew them. Structure, order, discipline, that was the foundation. But by the time the woman reached the steps of headquarters, every rule seemed to be bending around her presence. And then came the commander. Commander Jonathan Reeves was not a man who tolerated disruption. He had been forged in war, tempered by loss, hardened by decades of leadership. His name alone carried weight across the Navy. When Reeves spoke, men moved. When he walked into a room, silence followed. His reputation was steel, unshakable, unyielding, unquestionable. So when word reached him of the mysterious figure walking across his yard calm, confident, unchallenged, he rose from his desk without hesitation. The men outside noticed the shift before he even appeared. Guards straightened. Instructors swallowed their uncertainty. Even the recruits, sweating under the weight of silence, felt their spines stiffen. The commander was coming. Whispers cut across the yard. She's done now. He won't stand for this. Finally, someone's going to put her in her place. All eyes turned toward headquarters. And then the doors opened. Reeves stepped out, his boots striking the pavement, with deliberate rhythm. His figure was tall, broad-shouldered, every movement controlled. His presence alone demanded respect. He descended the steps slowly, his eyes sweeping across the yard before locking onto her. The effect was instant. Men who had been whispering seconds earlier clamped their mouths shut. Instructors froze mid-breath. The recruits stood like statues, waiting. The commander's gaze, sharp and unblinking, fixed on the woman like a hawk sighting prey. His jaw was tight, his brow low, his stride powerful. Everything about him radiated confrontation. This was it, the men thought. She would be stopped. The woman didn't break stride. Her pace remained calm, deliberate, her eyes lifting only, slightly as he approached. She didn't quicken, didn't falter, didn't show the faintest flicker of doubt. It was as though she had expected him. Reeves closed the distance until only a few feet separated them. The air was thick, heavy, charged with tension. The men in the yard held their breath. Every soldier there had seen the commander tear through. Insubordination like paper. They'd seen him break down men twice their size with a single sentence. None of them could imagine what he would do to this nameless, rankless stranger who had walked onto his base like she owned it. But what happened next defied every expectation. Reeves stopped. For a moment, he simply looked at her. His hardened face, lined from years of command, softened just slightly. His eyes, usually sharp as blades, seemed to recognize something no one else could see. And then, without hesitation, he drew himself to full height. His hand rose, crisp and deliberate, to his forehead. He saluted her. The yard erupted not in sound, but in disbelief. The silence shattered into gasps, wide eyes, hearts pounding. The commander, Jonathan Reeves, the man who never saluted lightly, who demanded respect, but rarely showed it first, was saluting her. A civilian, a woman with no rank, no name, no uniform. And yet his salute was sharp, precise, filled with meaning deeper than medals. The woman didn't return it. She didn't need to. Her eyes held his, calm and steady, carrying an acknowledgement far beyond military protocol. The salute lingered for several seconds, longer than expected, heavier than any command. Then Reeves lowered his hand, his expression unreadable, but his respect unmistakable. Whispers exploded across the yard. What the hell just happened? He saluted her. Who is she? No way, that can't be real. Men who thought they had seen everything now realized they had seen something greater, their commander bowing in respect to someone who didn't even wear a uniform. Lieutenant Harris felt his throat tighten. The dismissal he'd felt earlier now made sense. She hadn't ignored him out of arrogance. She had simply walked at a level of respect he hadn't earned. But the commander had. Petty Officer Klein, still burning from his failed attempt to block her, stared in disbelief. The shame he'd felt turned to confusion. How could the commander salute the very woman who had undone him with silence? Daniels, the seasoned petty officer, only nodded to himself. He had guessed she carried the weight of combat. The commander's salute confirmed it. She wasn't nobody. She was someone. Someone who had earned the respect of men like Reeves. The recruits looked around, wide-eyed, unsure if they had just witnessed history or madness. One whispered, "Should we salute?" Two, but no order came. No explanation followed. Reeves remained silent, his gaze steady, his posture tall. The salute was not for them to join. It was between him and her. And in that silence, the recruits understood something their training had never taught. Respect wasn't always about rank. Sometimes it was about sacrifice, unseen but undeniable. The woman gave no speech, no gesture, no hint of her identity. She simply stood, silent as ever, before the commander. And then, with the same quiet confidence that had carried her across the yard, she turned. Her footsteps echoed as she walked away, unhurried, unchallenged. The men watched, still stunned, as the gates closed behind her. Commander Reeves remained where he stood, his eyes fixed on the path she had taken. He didn't move until long after she disappeared from sight. When he finally turned back to his men, his face was stern again, but different. The recruits searched his expression for answers. The instructors waited for an explanation. But Reeves gave none. Instead, he spoke only one line. Respect is not always worn on the shoulder. And then he walked back into headquarters, leaving his men with questions they could never answer. That night, the base buzzed with whispers. Some swore she was a legend from black operations, someone whose name had been erased from records. Others said she had saved Reeves himself in a war zone long ago. A few claimed she wasn't military at all, but something even greater, someone whose deeds transcended rank. No one knew for certain, but every man there knew this. They had seen their commander salute her, and that meant she was real. A memory burned into them all. They would forget drills. They would forget missions. They would forget names of fellow recruits lost to time. But they would never forget the day a nameless, rankless woman walked across their yard and received the sharpest salute their commander had ever given. And though no one could explain it, every soldier carried the lesson in their hearts. Greatness doesn't always wear a uniform. Sometimes it walks in silence, and even the highest ranks bow in respect. The salute lingered like thunder after a storm. Sharp, crisp, deliberate. Commander Reeves had raised his hand with precision, not out of habit, not out of duty, but out of something heavier, respect. And then it ended, his hand lowered. Silence remained. The woman stood unflinching, calm as stone, her expression unreadable. She didn't return the gesture. She didn't need to. She simply held his gaze for a moment longer before turning slightly, her body still, her silence still louder than words. To the men in the yard, it was unthinkable. Their commander had saluted her. Gasps rippled through the ranks. Did you see that? He saluted her. That can't be real. That didn't happen. But it had. The toughest men in the Navy, trained to survive anything, now stood rattled by a single gesture. Their world was built on order. Salutes traveled upward, respect followed rank. But Reeves had reversed it, saluting downward or sideways, or perhaps upward to someone invisible to them. It broke every rule they knew. Lieutenant Harris felt his throat go dry. His mind scrambled for logic. Maybe it was a trick. Maybe it was part of some secret drill. Maybe Reeves was testing them, measuring their reactions. But Harris had served under Reeves long enough to know one thing. The commander never wasted gestures. Every salute, every word, every movement had purpose. Reeves wouldn't test them this way. No, this was real. And that truth unsettled Harris more than any battlefield he had faced. Petty Officer Klein's humiliation deepened. Just hours ago, he had tried to stop her, to stand tall in defense of order. And she had walked past him as though he were a stone in the road. Now the commander himself had honored her. Klein clenched his fists, shame burning hot in his chest. He wanted to hate her, to dismiss her as a fraud, but the salute stole even that from him. If Reeves respected her, then she was beyond reproach. But who was she? The recruits whispered furiously, their discipline breaking apart in the cracks. Of confusion. Do we salute too? One asked in panic. Don't be stupid, another hissed. She's not even military. Then why did the commander? Shut up, just shut up. But none of them could. The silence Reeves left behind was heavier than orders, heavier than discipline. It demanded questions, yet offered no answers. Petty Officer Daniels, older and sharper, only narrowed his eyes. The salute hadn't surprised him, not fully. He had seen something in her long before Reeves stepped out. That weight, that calm. He had called it combat. Now he knew it was more. It wasn't just that she had seen war. It was that war had seen her and bowed. He looked at the stunned recruits around him and muttered almost to himself, that wasn't for her rank. That was for what she's carried. The recruits didn't understand, but they felt it. The woman herself gave no acknowledgement. No nod, no thanks, no recognition of the honor she had been shown. She simply remained steady, her silence a wall no one could climb. Some saw it as arrogance. She didn't even salute back, one recruit whispered bitterly. But others sensed something else. Her lack of response wasn't dismissal, it was inevitability. She didn't need to return the salute, because the exchange wasn't about formality. It was about recognition. Recognition of something beyond. Rules. Beyond the Navy. Beyond them all. Commander Reeves, still standing where he had stopped, remained unreadable. His hand had lowered, but his eyes stayed fixed on her. Whatever history bound them, whatever truth lived in that salute, it belonged to him and him alone. Then, finally, Reeves turned. His voice, when it came, was level but carried iron. Back to training. It wasn't shouted. It wasn't harsh. But every man obeyed instantly. Boots slamming into gravel, voices raised, bodies moving. Yet their focus wasn't the same. Their drills lacked rhythm. Their minds stayed on the moment they had just witnessed. A salute, a silence, a mystery. Inside the mess hall later, whispers returned. She has to be Black Ops. No, she's something bigger. CIA, maybe. CIA doesn't get salutes from commanders. Then what? Who is she? Theories spread like wildfire. Each man wanted to explain the unexplainable, to find logic in the impossible. But deep down, none of their guesses felt right. Because explanations belonged to the world they knew, the world of ranks, orders, chains of command, and she didn't belong to that world at all. Some recruits lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling of their bunks. The image haunted them. Reeves, the unshakable commander, owing his respect. It wasn't just shocking. It was terrifying. Because if someone like her could exist nameless, rankless, yet commanding honor from the highest, then what else existed? Beyond the boundaries of their training? What else moved in shadows, unseen but powerful? The military had taught them that rank was everything. But now, they weren't so sure. Instructors met privately, debating in hushed tones. Reeves knows. Her. He has to. That salute wasn't random. But if she's that important, why no clearance, no records? Because maybe her record isn't meant to exist. The words settled like a stone in water. Silence followed. Because they all knew such people did exist, ghosts of wars. Fought in the dark, men and women erased from files, but remembered by those who had stood beside them. And maybe she was one of them. Reeves gave no explanation. In his office, the blinds drawn, he sat with silence heavier than the one she carried. Memories stirred in him, sharp as the edge of a blade. He had saluted countless officers, countless men of rank. But only once in his life had he saluted someone without uniform or insignia. Until today, he closed his eyes. Her face, unchanged by time, burned in his memory. A battlefield long past, a debt never spoken aloud, a respect that had no end. He owed her more than a salute. But the salute was all he could give. Outside, the men would never forget. They spoke of the gesture with awe, with confusion, with reverence. Over time, the details blurred, the heat of the sun, the exact path she walked, the angle of Reeves' salute. But the feeling remained, etched deep into their bones. They had seen authority bend. They had seen respect given where none was demanded. And they had learned that greatness didn't always wear stripes or stars. Sometimes greatness walked in silence, and even the highest ranks bowed. The salute was unexpected, but it was unforgettable. It was a gesture that shattered their certainty, that rewrote the rules they thought unbreakable. And though they didn't know it yet, that single moment would live in the legends of the base for years to come, whispered in mess halls, passed between recruits, carried like a ghost of respect that refused to fade. Because once on an ordinary day beneath an unforgiving sun, a nameless, rankless woman had walked across their yard, and the commander had saluted her. Rumors, like wildfire, don't need permission to spread. By dawn the next morning, the salute was no longer just an event. It was a legend in motion. Recruits whispered it in the mess hall, over trays of eggs and burnt toast. Instructors murmured about it in corners of the gym between sets of pull-ups. Even men hardened by decades of service found themselves glancing at one another with questions they couldn't voice. It wasn't the salute itself. They had all seen those before. It was the weight behind it. A commander like Reeves didn't bow lightly. And yet, he had. Theories multiplied by the hour. She's CIA. Has to be, one young SEAL whispered to another. Probably runs black sites we can't even talk about. No, another recruit countered. She's Delta. Or maybe from one of those ghost units. You know, Task Force Orange or something. Ghost units don't get saluted. Then maybe she saved Reeves' life once. Maybe she's the reason he's even standing here. Their voices dropped whenever officers passed by, but their curiosity never dimmed. Each rumor grew taller, stranger, more impossible. Some swore she had been part of a mission so classified that the files were burned the moment it ended. Others claimed she had stopped an entire terrorist cell single-handedly. A few whispered she wasn't even military at all, but something higher, something untouchable. By the end of the day, she had become everything and nothing at once. Petty Officer Klein wrestled hardest with the rumors. He had been the one to try and stop her, the one who had puffed his chest and demanded authority. And she had brushed past him as though he were a child. He couldn't forget it. Every theory felt like a blade against his pride. If she was CIA, if she was Delta, if she was anything close to what the whisper suggested, then he had stood against a storm barefoot and foolish. And Reeves' salute only deepened the cut. Klein kept telling himself the salute didn't matter. That Reeves had his reasons, personal or otherwise. But when he closed his eyes, he saw it again, crisp and perfect, the hand of authority raised to someone nameless. It gnawed at him. Lieutenant Harris, on the other hand, tried to stay logical. Focus on the mission. He barked at his recruits when he caught them whispering, "She's not your concern." But in the quiet moments, even he couldn't stop his mind from wandering. Harris had served under Reeves long enough to know the commander didn't waste time on theatrics. If Reeves had saluted her, there was a reason. And if there was a reason, it meant she mattered more than anyone on base was allowed to understand. That unsettled Harris deeply, because discipline thrived on clarity. Soldiers followed orders because the world was meant to make sense. But now, a shadow had stepped into their world, and their commander had bowed to it. Clarity cracked. Some men tried to laugh it off. Maybe she's his long-lost sister, one joked. Or his old girlfriend. The laughter was hollow. None of them believed it. The salute hadn't been personal. It had been official, as sharp as any he had given on parade. No family bond, no personal affection, no hidden romance could carry that weight. It was bigger than all of them. Daniels, the older SEAL who had seen combat more than the rest combined, watched the rumors swirl with quiet eyes. He didn't speak much, but when he did, the others listened. "She's none of those things you're saying," he told a group huddled in the barracks. "Then what is she?" one asked eagerly. Daniels leaned back, his gaze far away, as though seeing another time, another battlefield. "She's a ghost," he said finally. The recruits laughed nervously. "No, I'm serious," Daniels continued. "Not a literal ghost, but the kind that walk among us without names, without files. You'll never read about them. You'll never know their stories. But they exist. And when you meet one, you don't question it. You just know." His words left a silence, heavier than laughter. A ghost. The men didn't know whether to believe it or fear it. Meanwhile, Reeves offered nothing. No explanation, no correction, no acknowledgement of the whispers spreading like weeds. His silence was more powerful than denial. It left the men to wonder, to imagine, to wrestle with their own need for answers. Some resented him for it. Others admired him more. But all of them felt it, the unspoken truth that something far beyond their clearance had brushed against their lives. And Reeves had honored it with the highest gesture he could give. Night fell on the base, but the rumors didn't sleep. In the barracks, men lay awake, their minds spinning with possibilities. Some dreamed of her, a faceless figure cloaked in shadow. Others dreamed of Reeves, his salute replaying in endless loops. And a few dreamed of battles they hadn't fought, missions they hadn't been on, visions of deserts, jungles, and ruins where nameless figures moved silently through chaos. The salute had carved itself into their subconscious. Outside, under the stars, Daniels sat alone on a bench, watching the night. His mind drifted back years, to a time when he had been deployed in a place no map ever marked. He remembered whispers then too of men and women who operated without insignia, whose presence turned battles before they began. He had never seen one, not until now. He whispered into the dark, words only the night could hear. "Who are you?" The stars, silent as she had been, gave no answer. By morning, the woman was gone. No one saw her leave. No one knew if she had been escorted, if she had vanished, or if she had simply walked back through the gates the same way she had entered. Her absence only deepened the mystery. But Reeves' salute remained, alive in memory, burning in whispers. Theories continued, but a new tone had crept into them, less speculation, more reverence. She was no longer just a question. She was a legend, and legends don't need names. Somewhere in the silence of his office, Reeves stared at a single photo tucked inside his desk. It was old, the edges frayed, the colors faded. It showed a desert, long ago, with a team of men standing in dust and ruin. And at the edge of the frame, almost hidden, stood a woman. Her face was the same, calm, steady, silent. Reeves closed the photo, locking it away. Some debts, some battles, some truths could never be spoken. Not here, not now. But in his heart, the salute had not been enough. The men would never know her story. They would only know the whispers, the endless, growing rumors of who she might have been, what she might have done. And that was enough. Because sometimes, legends were meant to live not in books or records, but in the silence of those who had witnessed them. And she was one of those legends. The salute had told them so. The rest they could only whisper. The base was restless. It had been 3 days since the woman had walked across the yard, yet her presence still lingered in every corner. Instructors glanced at one another across the gym. Recruits whispered under their breath, and even Reeves' most seasoned officers felt an edge of uncertainty. The salute had not only shattered expectations, it had reframed them. Discipline, hierarchy, rank, everything they had known about authority now felt fragile, almost arbitrary. And yet, no one dared speak openly about her. Inside the commander's office, Reeves paced. The photo on his desk, the one he had refused to show anyone, remained untouched, yet heavy with memory. He could almost feel her presence, calm and unyielding, walking silently across the yard once more. He knew his men were asking questions. They always asked. That was their nature. But some truths weren't theirs to know. Some debts weren't theirs to witness. And this was one of those truths. He leaned back in his chair, letting the silence settle around him like a cloak. The first to approach him was Lieutenant Harris. His uniform was pristine, his hands clenched in nervous anticipation. "Sir," he began, his voice measured, "the men, they're asking. About her, about the salute. They need to understand." Reeves did not answer immediately. He studied Harris quietly, as if weighing what could be revealed and what could not. "Harris," he said finally, his voice low, steady, "some things don't require understanding. They require recognition." Harris frowned. "Recognition, sir?" "Yes," Reeves replied, eyes narrowing slightly. "They need to recognize the weight she carries, not the uniform she wears." Outside the office, whispers continued to spread like a creeping shadow. In the barracks, recruits speculated endlessly. Some claimed she had single-handedly averted a global incident. Others insisted she had trained covert units before they were born. Some even swore she had disappeared from every official record after her missions, leaving only scars and legends behind. Daniels, watching quietly from the sidelines, only shook his head. "None of them are close," he muttered. But he didn't correct them. Some things weren't meant to be explained. Because the truth, what really existed behind the calm, nameless figure, was a weight even the strongest man might not survive to bear. In the gym, Klein tried again to make sense of what had happened. His pride still burned from his failed attempt to block her path, but now it was tempered by awe. He approached Daniels hesitantly. Do you think she's really all that people say?" Daniels' eyes met his, unblinking. "I don't know," he said slowly, "and I don't want to. Because believing in it, understanding it, that's different. You survive better if you respect it without questioning it." Klein nodded slowly, the words settling uneasily in his mind. It was a lesson far beyond drills, beyond push-ups, beyond the hours spent under the unforgiving sun. It was a lesson about life itself. That evening, the commander addressed the men for the first time since her visit. The training yard, normally brimming with energy, fell silent as Reeves walked among the rows of recruits and instructors. His presence alone commanded attention. He paused in front of the newest recruits, young men barely weeks into the program, their eyes wide and unsure. "You've seen something unusual," he began. "A person came onto this base who didn't follow our rules, who wasn't bound by rank, and yet, by their presence alone, demanded respect." Heads nodded slowly, though no one dared speak. "The first instinct," he continued, voice calm but carrying weight, "is to question it, to doubt it, to push back." A recruit shifted nervously. "But sometimes," Reeves said, letting his gaze sweep the yard, "you must recognize the truth without needing to understand it. You must give respect where it is earned, even if the world has not given it a name." The men listened, absorbing every word, feeling the echo of the silent figure who had walked among them. Reeves' words were deliberate, precise, but they left the soldiers with more questions than answers. What missions had she undertaken? What battles had she survived? Why did she command their commander's respect? Harris felt the frustration, not in his chest. "Sir," he asked quietly, How do we prepare for someone like that?" Reeves looked at him, the lines on his face deepened by years of experience. "You don't," he said simply. "You respect it, you learn from it, and you carry the lesson forward. Some truths aren't to be confronted, they're to be understood through actions, not explanations." Later, in hushed corners, instructors and recruits debated. Some felt inspired, imagining the courage and skill required to command such silent authority. Others felt uneasy, haunted by the thought that someone could exist beyond their comprehension, beyond their hierarchy. Yet in every discussion, one theme emerged. No one questioned the respect they had witnessed. The salute, the calm, the unwavering presence, it had left an indelible mark. And while they did not know her name, her rank, or her purpose, they all understood one truth: she was not ordinary. Outside the barracks, under a sky streaked with stars, Daniel spoke softly to Klein and a few others. "You'll never see her again," he said. "Maybe not in your lifetime, but the impact she leaves, that lasts." Klein swallowed hard. "Do you mean the salute?" Daniel shook his head. "No, more than that. The way she moved. The way she carried herself. The way she reminded all of us what true strength looks like. That's the part you carry with you. That's the part no one can take away." It was a lesson far beyond drills, far beyond missions. It was about courage, dignity, and presence. About showing strength without proving it. Even Reeves, alone in his office that night, felt the weight of the unspoken truth. He thought back to missions long past, to deserts and jungles where few survived and fewer were remembered. He remembered promises made silently, debts incurred without witnesses, respect given without acknowledgement. The woman had walked into that yard carrying all of it, without a word, and left behind the echo of something far greater than any uniform, medal, or rank. He would never tell anyone her story, not fully. Some truths were too dangerous, too sacred, too impossible to explain. And yet, the lesson remained. Recognition often comes without explanation. Respect is earned, even without rank. Authority exists in presence as much as in command. The base slept uneasily that night. The men dreamed of her silhouette walking through the heat, of Reeves' sharp salute, of the silence that had followed. Some dreamed of battles they had never fought, missions they could barely imagine. And all of them, in some way, carried her presence with them. Because the unspoken truth was a lesson more enduring than any drill, more profound than any lecture, more vital than any medal. Greatness does not always announce itself. Sometimes it simply walks in silence, commanding attention and respect, in ways the world cannot quantify. And when it does, even the highest rank bends in acknowledgement. By morning, the whispers continued, but a new reverence had crept into them. The men no longer speculated with mockery or envy. They speculated with awe. She was no longer a question. She was a benchmark, a standard, a ghostly ideal of capability and silent authority. Some would never see her again. Some would never know her name. Some might never know the truth behind the salute or why Reeves had honored her so. But the lesson would remain. And in that lesson lay something far greater than any medal, any rank, or any drill. The truth unspoken is sometimes the strongest force of all. The base was quiet, but it carried a weight heavier than any drill or inspection. Days had passed since the woman had crossed the yard, yet her presence lingered like a shadow that refused to fade. Soldiers moved through routines, carried out exercises, and trained with precision, but everything felt slightly off. Recruits whispered in the mess hall, swapping fragments of speculation. Instructors watched silently, occasionally glancing toward empty pathways where she had once walked. Even Commander Reeves moved with a different energy, one shaped by memory, respect, and the silent acknowledgement of a presence that could not be recorded, controlled, or replicated. The woman's footsteps had long vanished, yet the echo remained. Petty Officer Klein lingered on the obstacle course, trying again to regain his composure. Weeks of training had taught him resilience, but nothing prepared him for what he had witnessed. He remembered the way she had moved, effortless yet deliberate, each step measured but unhurried. He remembered her calm gaze, steady as a compass, unflinching against dozens of questioning eyes. And most of all, he remembered the commander's salute, crisp and deliberate, a gesture that seemed to break and rebuild the very hierarchy of the base in one motion. The memory gnawed at him like an invisible wound. Klein shook his head. How does someone even exist like that? He muttered under his breath. Daniels, observing silently from a nearby bench, only smiled faintly. She exists the way some people do, Klein. Not for medals, not for recognition. She exists to remind you of what strength really looks like without asking for approval. Klein's lips parted, but he had no reply. Words could not capture it. In the barracks, the younger recruits debated in whispers. She's untouchable, one said. No, another corrected. She's more than that. She's a standard, something to aim for. Their voices carried a mix of fear, awe, and admiration. Even at their age, they understood the lesson. Greatness was not about rank or ceremony. It was about presence, action, and silent authority. And she had carried all of it without a word. Commander Reeves, alone in his office, stared at the photo he kept hidden. Desert sun baked the background, dust curling around a long-forgotten battlefield. Yet in the corner, the same figure emerged, calm, steady, silent. He ran a hand along the edges, tracing the memory without acknowledgement. Some debts could not be repaid. Some truths could not be shared. But in that single salute, in that fleeting acknowledgement, he had honored her in the only way he could. Not with words, not with ceremony, but with recognition. The kind that lasts a lifetime. Outside, the wind stirred lightly across the training yard. Soldiers moved in formation, executing drills with precision, yet all eyes occasionally flicked toward the open pathways she had crossed. Petty Officer Klein walked among them, trying to refocus, but the lesson remained. Some presences do not fade, some echoes cannot be silenced, and some strength exists beyond understanding. He glanced at Daniels. Do you think we'll ever see her again? Daniels shook his head slowly. Maybe, maybe not. Doesn't matter. What matters is the lesson she left behind. And in that moment, Klein realized the truth of it. She would never return to impress them or claim their admiration. She had already left a mark deeper than any drill, scar, or rank could create. Recruits and instructors alike found themselves acting differently. Decisions were quieter, movements more deliberate, respect more carefully measured. Even small acts, saluting one another, acknowledging efforts, listening before speaking, took on new weight. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was real. The woman's presence had redefined their understanding of leadership, authority, and strength. She had done it without saying a word. Commander Reeves finally walked the yard again, overseeing drills with his usual rigor, but something had changed. He moved with a softness beneath the discipline, a silent acknowledgement that true power did not always need to be wielded. Sometimes it simply existed, unshaken and unspoken. When one recruit performed exceptionally well during an exercise, Reeves offered no lecture, no praise, but he allowed a small nod, a quiet recognition of effort, unburdened by ceremony. It was a subtle echo of the lesson she had left behind, that respect and recognition can exist without expectation, without rank, without protocol. And for those paying attention, the nod carried the weight of the salute he had once given her. The base eventually resumed routine, yet the legend of her visit never faded. Veterans returning from deployment spoke of it in hushed tones, careful, to avoid the ears of those uninitiated. Stories traveled beyond the base, morphing with each telling, but all carried a common theme. A nameless, Rankles's woman had walked onto the yard, unflinching, commanding the ultimate respect from one of Vana, the most disciplined men alive. Every version, every whisper, retained the essence. She had left the base changed, whether or not anyone fully understood it. Petty Officer Klein remained reflective. The humiliation he once felt had been transformed into awe. He had glimpsed a level of competence and presence beyond his comprehension, yet it was not intimidating. It was inspiring. Daniels approached him quietly. "Remember this," he said, voice low. "It's not about her name, her rank, or even the missions she's done. It's about the standard she set. That standard exists now in you too, whether you realize it or not." Klein nodded, feeling a weight lift even as he carried it. The lesson was larger than any single event, larger than any one act of courage or recognition. It was a lesson about integrity, authority, and silent strength. The commander's office remained as ever, orderly and quiet, yet Reeves could feel her influence even there. The photo on his desk was closed, but her presence lingered in his memory. He did not speak of her. Some debts could not be repaid, some truths could not be shared. But the salute remained, permanent, a silent acknowledgement of respect for someone whose story would never fully be told. And that was enough. As the sun set over the base, casting long shadows across the training yard, the soldiers paused for a moment, almost unconsciously, tracing the path she had once walked. No one spoke her name. No one recorded her rank. Few would ever see her again. And yet, she had walked through their lives in a single day and left them forever changed. Every footstep, every glance, every silence had carried lessons they would remember for the rest of their careers, for the rest of their lives. The salute, the calm, the invisible weight of her presence, these had become the benchmark of what true courage and authority could be. Klein exhaled, letting the realization settle into him. She had not needed medals. She had not needed recognition. She had not needed approval. Her strength had existed quietly, powerfully, undeniably. And in that, she had left behind the greatest gift a nameless Rankles's figure could ever give. The understanding that the essence of leadership is presence, integrity, and respect earned, not demanded. The base, the commander, the soldiers, they would never forget it. Because some people, some presences, do not leave with steps or words. They leave a mark. They leave a legend. and she had left hers in a single silent step across the yard.